Well, 5 days into a special session, and tonight lawmakers are headed home, but they're leaving Georgians with a big question. Will an elections deal make close races feel more trusted or more contested?
That session ended with a late compromise and plenty of tension. Atlanta News First reporter Abby Casoris is at the Capitol tonight. So Abby, bottom line here, what could these changes mean for voters statewide?
Well, if there is a major statewide race with paper-thin margins, there will be an automatic check built in, and there will be a committee meant to help the state return to paper ballots. Proponents of this say it helps build trust in elections, while critics say that it now sows seeds of doubts even after election results come in.
What do we do?
Stand up, fight back! This special session was supposed to be quick, handle a short list and go home. Instead, it turned into a high-stakes argument over elections. Republicans dropped a redistricting push early. Democrats say the whole session was unnecessary, and they argue Georgia's elections are already secure.
We have wasted a lot of time and money, and where are we?
The pressure point was a deadline tied to QR codes on ballots. Lawmakers moved that timeline out and paired it with changes meant to address what happens when a statewide race is razor close. Under the deal, a close statewide race within half of a percentage point would get an automatic second look. Supporters call it a safeguard that could reduce complaints and calm tensions. Critics argue it would invite more challenges after Election Day.
This bill is on its way to the Senate.
The bill also sets up a committee to recommend what Georgia's next voting system should look like, with a long-term focus on more paper in the process. Republican Senator Max Burns says the compromise is about building confidence without forcing hand counts everywhere.
It provides some stability and some assurance that moving into the rest of 2026, we've got a stable election system.
Yes. Yes.
Some Democrats who voted yes weren't thrilled, but felt the state couldn't risk a court fight tied to the deadline.
Total chaos and uncertainty if this were to go to litigation.
Move that the Senate stand adjourned.
With that, lawmakers cleared the Capitol after a session they described as challenging, exhausting, and stressful.
And we'll be watching to see how this plays out in real life with counties. If there are these hand counts and how much money it could cost, the state would then reimburse those counties in about 17 days after the hand count. We also will wait to see when and if the governor will sign off on these, as well as that is his duty to do so. Live at the state capitol, Abby Casoris, Atlanta News First.